My name's Paul Kalbfleisch, and I'm the co-author of a new book called The Joy Experiments. And I'm here today with Sara and Marshall to talk about that book and to talk about what it means for our cities and all of us who live in cities. The book, The Joy Experiments, can be purchased at joyexperiments.com.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Can you do us a favor?
Can you please leave us a 5-star review, like or subscribe to our show, and share with your friends? We'd also love it if you followed us on social media.
We are a homegrown community project, and every bit helps. On with the show. This is it.
Paul Kalbfleisch, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're excited to have you on Bonn Park and to talk about your new project, The Joy Experiment. Marshall and I have been poring over this book. It's beautiful to touch. The artwork is incredibly pleasing. There's photographs by you, gorgeous photographs by you. The artwork is by Sarah Farquhar. It's co-written with Scott Higgins of Hip Developments. I find this book to be an interesting and easy read, and it provokes thought back to what we already know, but we keep forgetting to remember. We forget to remember these concepts. So with that, why don't I let you explain what the Joy Experiment is?
Yeah, I was thinking that your audience must be wondering what the heck this book is all about with that sort of very good but also somewhat mysterious intro. The Joy Experiments is a book about what cities should be doing for the people who live in them and what people should be doing for their cities. The premise of the Joy Experiments is that cities have always been sort of the source of the human spirit. Things like such as the humanities, creativity, invention, collaboration, tolerance, and inclusion all those sort of those great things come out of cities. The great movements come out of cities. And we need all those things more than ever if we're going to sort of work through the problems we have in society and on this planet. And so cities are becoming very, very important. And to build cities in a way that really inspires and nurtures the human spirit is probably a key goal and a new goal for what cities should be. And so the book delves into that. And the book, as you mentioned, is written by both Scott Higgins of Hip Developments and myself. And I do project and consulting work for Hip Developments. The book was written initially to explain why Hip Developments does many of the things they do, which is usually above and beyond what they would normally have to do as they're building real estate development projects in the community. And that stems from Scott's belief that cities are really important, and my own belief that cities are important. And when you change cities, you can change the world. So it started off by us as a story of why Hip Developments is doing that, but then it quickly evolved into the story of cities and what's important with cities and much of what I've just sort of described, using Hip projects, which we call Joy Experiments, as a bit of a backdrop, and Waterloo Region as a bit of a backdrop for just a way of setting the stage for what cities should be and how we should be building them very differently and what that means to everyone who lives in a city.
And I love this concept inside the book that's, well, first of all, it explores that joy is practical, but how do we define joy? And then we kind of go from there and down a beautiful journey with examples of things that have worked in other cities, things that maybe used to work back in the day. Why are these things changing? But what I love is the cities shouldn't be built around a business. The city should be the community that is self-sustaining, gorgeous, that people want as their third place. And correct me if I'm wrong in this idea, and that big business should be coming to you. They should come to this community that you've created. This should be a place that you want to spend your time. That it's not, here's the giant tech or the giant business or whatever, and now all the people come. And now we're all coming close to here so that we can work here.
Yeah, there is a bit of a flip starting to happen in society and I think you are right. I'm not sure I thought about it quite the flip that you're doing to it. But that's the great thing about writing a book. You write a book and you put it out there, and all of a sudden people start telling you things and you start learning about your topic from how people look at what you've written, which I think is beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I think in the past, people chose where they lived based on where they could get their jobs in a very, blunt fashion. But now things are shifting. They're shifting because we're, especially, places like Waterloo region, we're quite deep into the innovation economy. And the innovation economy, all of a sudden, they need people from all over the world. And so, and we, as we've known, going through this COVID experience, all of a sudden working from home or choosing where you want to work, or choosing what city you want to live in, doesn't necessarily have to line up perfectly with where the job is. And so I think there is a flip now, so that businesses in the innovation economy are sort of focusing on where are the people that we need, and maybe we should be setting up shop where they are, as opposed to trying to get them to, come where we are. Or maybe, we don't care where people live. All of those things sort of flip the whole business development model of cities a bit on its head. And then we're just at the beginning of that, with the potential of it flipping it on its head much, much more as we go forward. So it's and I believe in the book, we said, I know Scott says this all the time, that, the cities that are joyful, the cities that produce joy, the cities that uplift people's human spirit are the cities that are going to win in the future. Because that's going to be the thing that draws business into communities.
The book, for me, does a beautiful job of bridging the past with the present. And there's this little paragraph on page 81. I remember it talks about how, in the history of Waterloo region, there have been these Thomas Edison types, and the names you list are Kaufman, Krug, Breithaupt, Bauer, Lazarus. And I thought, wow, that's really something to see those names all together in one paragraph. And it really speaks to something that, we hear these names in a singular way sometimes, but that was really smart to put them all together like that and say, take a look at this. Have you ever considered this? These people that paved the way for what we're enjoying today.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? In full disclosure, I spent 10 years at Research in Motion, in charge of global brand and brand strategy. And in that time, I was traveling around the world to many places, and BlackBerry was the hot thing. And people would, first of all, a lot of people assumed we were an American company. And then when we told them, well, we're from this place called Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo. Oh, really? Okay. What, no idea what that was. And I would say, well, are you familiar with Crown Royal? Oh yeah. Well, that's where Crown Royal came from. Are you familiar with Hush Puppies shoes? Oh yeah. Well, that's where that came from. You're familiar with, Bauer skates and a handful of other names, and they're going, my God, what goes on in that town that you keep creating these things. And we talk about that in the book because it goes back to a section that was really about the importance of creating an identity for a community, something that everyone can say, yes, this is us, and that it continues to be us, even though everything changes around this. This still is sort of part of our DNA, and what we will use to figure out who we want to become in the future. And that it gets articulated in a way that everyone can feel part of it. And so we were sort of looking at this wonderful history that you outlined of these businesses and these people, and we saw them as brilliant, creative problem solvers. I mean, if you're a brilliant business person and have created, a big industry or an empire or a smart business, there's a lot of creativity that goes into that to solve problems in a way that no one has done before. And we sort of suggested that is sort of part of our DNA. And, maybe people look at sort of Montreal or Vancouver as a creative place, but we're actually a very creative place too, if you sort of associate that with creative problem solving. And we should be proud of that. We should celebrate that, because you attract what you celebrate. And if we want to remain that way, if we want to use that element of our DNA to move forward, we should try our best to celebrate that. And so part of our joy experiment projects, and one joy experiment was to sort of tackle the idea of, well, what is our cultural DNA, and what is our identity? And we sort of threw out the phrase, the creative capital of Canada, which is truly an audacious phrase, but why not be audacious? Because, as you say, on that page, 84, which I have my book beside me, but I'm not going to check to make sure you're right. We do have that creative element to who we are, and you see it today not only in the tech but in advanced manufacturing and in other areas where it's continuing. And we should sort of say we have a responsibility to continue that creative lineage into the future. It'll evolve into something slightly different. We're not going to be, continuing to make shoes and tires. We don't do that anymore. But now we're making, software, and who knows what we'll be doing in the future. But that's pretty cool that we have that. Now, are we great at celebrating it? Well, I think maybe that's the next frontier for us.
When you talk about celebrating, I can see behind you, you've got one of the foot pedals for the Singer installation. No, was this the one that you say online that you messed up? Maybe. I think on your Instagram, you said I messed up one of them. So
yes.
So that piece in itself, which I'd love for you to describe for our listeners, is a celebration of the roots of where we came from. Do you want to talk about that installation, which I know isn't necessarily related to the joy experiment, but it's related to celebrating our past through public art spaces?
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Well, I think it is a joy experiment in that it's definitely an experiment, and its job is to try to become what I refer to as the infrastructure for the human spirit. It's not just a mural that's colorful and brightens a dark alley. It's actually has something to say about us. It has something to. It's a tool that, as I say, we can use to define who we want to become in the future. Now you say, well, how does a piece of art do that? So let me sort of back up and describe it. This is a piece of public art, a large piece. It will be 12 4x5 foot panels that will go up 2.5 stories in the atrium lobby of Glove Box, which is a new office complex in downtown Kitchener on Victoria Street, big glass building that if you drive by, you've probably noticed it. And it was part of the building was the old Huck glove factory. And I was working on this project down in their basement and found an old Singer sewing machine foot pedal and said, I don't know what we're going to do with this, but we're going to do something. And that was probably, close to 3 years ago. And as the idea of the atrium came up, and what are we going to do with a giant wall that big, I began to play with this Singer sewing machine foot pedal, which, for those who don't know it, literally gave power to the sewing machine, because it was on a lever, and you pushed it back and forth, and that moved the sewing machine. So it was sort of the engine of our part of the engine of our industrial past, made by someone actually using their legs to do this. And I thought, well, it's a very, very small element of our very big past, but there's something beautiful about using that as a symbol for our past, because when you celebrate the smallest thing, it's the most inclusive thing you can do, because by celebrating the smallest, you celebrate everyone and everything that went into that success. We sort of have a tradition around here of celebrating the names that we just talked about. And then we don't really have a way of taking that down to the whole community level. And the other thing that we have a tradition of in this community is we take some of the old machines from our industrial past and give them a nice, clean black coat of paint and put them out. And that's sort of acknowledging the past. This is what we had. Here it is. Oh, it's different. Okay, that's interesting. But the job of really creating a identity and celebrating what we need to attract more people today and in the future is we have to interpret the past. We have to sort of say, so what about this thing? And so my goal was to try and, ironically take a piece of machinery, but turn it into something very big, bold, and colorful. And so what we have is this 4 by 5 foot 12 panel, large piece of art that is a repetition of that sewing machine panel or sewing machine pedal in bright colors, almost in a sort of stained glass window effect or patchwork quilt. And it's really meant to say, this was the smallest element, but it's who we are. And so there's many of them. And there's something beautiful when you see the word singer, which is on the foot pedal 12 times going up the wall. It's a lot of voices in an ironic way. And so I call the piece chorus. And I speak to it as this is how we operated in the past, in a collaborative way. And here we are taking that past and turning it sideways and making it bright and bold and colorful and everything, and anything but sort of a black and white view of the past, because that element of collaboration and inclusiveness is what we have to take with us. We have to use that to help us where we need to go. It looks celebratory, and that allows us to celebrate this thing. So to me, it's an example of taking, something as, well, we have a piece of art that sits there, or a mural that brightens something. But this turns it into infrastructure for the human spirit. This turns it into something that can inspire us, that can define us, that we can all look at and say, okay, that's who this community was. And I'm in there somewhere in that sort of big maze of lines and colors. And we have to remain collaborative as we move forward. So is it a joy experiment? Is it a hip development's joy experiment? No, but Scott and I never intended the joy experiments to be just about hip projects. And that's why we sort of we list and describe what we view our joy experiments from all around the world, and why we will likely someday down the road have the Joy Experiments podcast, and I'll be on the other side of this microphone and asking other people questions. Mm-hmm. The chorus piece of art will likely be up sometime in February or March of 22, I believe. If I don't screw any more of the panels up.
The following song you're about to hear is Just Your Fool, performed by Miss Angel and Mel Brown. Miss Angel herself has given us permission to use this song.
I'm just myself. Still love you, baby.
Marshall, let's take a moment to hear from this week's sponsor, the Mel Brown Music Festival and Symposium. We're going to be hearing from Lee Willingham. He's a professor of music at Wilfrid Laurier and also the director of the Laurier Center for Music in the Community. Then we're going to be hearing from Carlos Morgan. Carlos is a Canadian soul and rhythm blues singer. He's most noted for winning the Juno Award for Best R&B Soul Recording at the Juno Awards of 1997 for his album Feelin' Alright. Carlos is also responsible for the inception of the Mel Brown Music Festival and Symposium and key to its role in our community. He is the curator and artistic director of the event. So blues legend Mel Brown was the driving force behind a blues revival in our area. Mr. Brown brought the sound of the Mississippi Delta to Waterloo region. As a renowned guitarist, Mel Brown collaborated with great acts like Etta James and B.B. King, among others, and decided to put his roots down right here. And his adopted hometown of the Waterloo region loved Mel Brown. In an interview, when asked how he'd like to be remembered, Mel Brown said, "If my music could touch somebody's heart and bring you closer to love, then that would be it." People need to take time to think about what love is and how they can insert their love into life. Now let's hear more from the organizers.
Thank you, and it's great to be here with you and with my good colleague, Carlos Morgan.
Yes.
We're really excited about a whole bunch of things around this festival and symposium that address what we think is something really missing in our community, and that is a focus on a feature of Black culture and Black music with some incredible artists and creative people. And connected to that is the legacy that Mel Brown left us by his influence and his generosity in accepting people of all backgrounds and musical experiences to sit in with him, to learn from him. This festival and symposium was born out of an idea that really came from Carlos around elevating music, but then I took it to the level of, well, how can I, as a white privileged person in a position of power in a university, how can we address what we think are systemic issues in our university? And the key issue, the elephant in the room, if you will, is that our program privileges the music of Eurocentric white composers, most of whom are dead, and a little bit of jazz. I have to say, though, that since the opening of our community music program, there's been a wider lane for musical genres of all different backgrounds and styles. That to say, there's still an imbalance in the racial makeup of our professors and our student body. Carlos, I really am grateful to be working with you, and I value what you're doing already in this project that is making it come alive and making it exciting for our community.
Well, thank you, Lee. This is very exciting. I'm honored and I'm grateful to be a part of a team of people who share this vision, bringing and highlighting and featuring Black music in Kitchener-Waterloo with Mel Brown and his legacy and his indelible musical contributions that he brought with him, and his history and his knowledge of music, blues, and what he did for the community here, building upon his foundation, building upon the roots that he brought to Kitchener-Waterloo through his music and his passion of music and so on. There's a 3-day festival happening May 27th to 29th and happening at 3 different locations. The Jazz Room on May 27th, the KPL, Kitchener Public Library, on the 28th, and the museum on the 29th. It's going to be featuring different musical acts, different genres of music, Black music, which will include a blues, and we're happy and delighted to and proud to say that Miss Angel Brown will be the headliner for the whole festival. So she'll be performing along with Errol Blackwood, the Waterloo Region Mass Choir, Alicia Brilla, Jolene Rita, Rufus John, Akaya, and hopefully we'll have Glenn Lewis, a Grammy Award winner, and Miranda Love, who's also a Juno Award winner, performing the whole weekend. So we're going to be focusing on and highlighting these aspects of Black music, which again was built upon the foundation of Mr. Mel Brown in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. The Mel Brown Music Festival and Symposium runs from Friday, May 27th to Sunday, May 29th. Tickets are available at melbrownfestival.ca. We'll link to the website in our show notes. And now back to the show.
I'm excited for that podcast for you. This leads into what I want to say about in chapter 3, and I really marvel at this idea that, so in chapter 3, you and Scott do an amazing job establishing this link between joy and creativity. And when you learn something about yourself through somebody else's writing, I think that's always such a powerful thing. And what I realized, and I've kind of talked to Sarah about this along the way, but this chapter really did it for me. It has to do with the fact that 2.5 years ago, when I reconnected with Sarah, and we began a podcast, I knew there was a void in my life. I knew there was something missing and had been missing for a long time. I couldn't have told you what it was. And it would have taken a long time to kind of reveal itself. But what it was at that point, for whatever reason, I was not being a creative individual. You can, and as the chapter talks about, you can, creativity can be in any part of your life, like creativity can be in trying to endure maybe a wedding party that you don't want to be at or something, or lots of situations like that. But for me, that chapter really spoke to this idea that the joy that I'm experiencing now in early 2022, no question, and you taught me this, Paul, is that is directly linked to this podcast and what I'm taking from this podcast and how it feeds me energy, and I can put that energy back into it. And it is clear as day to me now, only now after reading your book in chapter 3, that's exactly what was missing 2.5 years ago in my life. So first of all, thank you for that. And 2, at some point in your life, you must have discovered that somewhere in the way that incredible link between joy and creativity.
Well, that was quite a statement. So thank you for saying it. I it's kind of enlightening when someone says that about something that you've done, and that what they get out of something. It makes it this is the reason we do these things, right? And the beauty of that. So you've sort of thrown a few things at me, and let me sort of take this sort of in stages. Going back to this idea of the creative capital of Canada, which was sort of our identity experiment that we did talk about in the book, one that we learned a lot from and learned how to do experiments better from, which we also talk about in the book. But at the core of that, people would say creative. Well, I'm not creative. Because why? Because I don't paint, and I don't play an instrument, or I don't write a book, or whatever. And a lot of people associate creativity with the output. I didn't make a painting, I didn't write a book, I didn't compose a song. Where in actual fact, creativity is the mental process. And the output is, everything from a podcast to a beautiful garden to a clever way of helping your child do a school project to a multi-billion-dollar company. Those are all outputs of creativity. And it's really just the process of trying to look at things from different angles and different sides, and then putting something together to either solve a problem or to express something or to do something that wasn't there before. And I suspect that the element of the podcast that gives you the joy is the collaborative nature between the two of you, and how you both bring things together, and then all of a sudden something starts to happen that you didn't sort of quite know before. So I think a lot, most of your audience, I think everyone in your audience is creative. There's a beautiful book that we quote in our book called How to Fly a Horse, and it debunks the idea that creativity is an exclusive thing belonging to people who wear funny hats and crazy clothes and have eureka moments all the time. No such thing. There is no such thing as a eureka moment. It's just a lot of hard work. And in the book, they say, creativity is like throwing a baseball. We can all do it. Now, some people can do it a heck of a lot better than others, but we can all do it. So, the one message I want to impart to everyone is that, creativity is something we all have. And, the more you do it, the more you work at it, the better you get at it, just like throwing a baseball. And certainly I'm going to plug our book, The Joy Experiments, but I'm also going to plug the book, How to Fly a Horse. It's pretty good in that field. Now, you mentioned sort of, my own personal experiences with creativity. And, that could be a podcast all into itself.
Yep.
But I think, throughout my whole life, I've been a kid or a person who was really good at connecting dots that most people didn't see. Partially because my brain wandered sideways as opposed to straight ahead. The interesting thing about that, because I'm an old person now, but when I was a kid, people were impressed by that skill. Said, wow, yeah, kid daydreams a lot, and he's got to get that under control. But this kid can sort of see laterally, and he's going to go places. Then when I was raising my own kids, some of those traits which my kids had were viewed as problems. And they have ADD, and they have this, and they have that, and all of a sudden the catalog of issues and the catalog of it's almost treated like you had a disease as opposed to you were creative. And I think we not only do we rob people of their skills and rob society of what they can do, but we rob people of their happiness and of joy a little bit. So I think we should be acknowledging that we're all creative, and we should sort of delve into and explore that, because that will again sort of lift up this wonderful thing called the human spirit. Because the book talks a lot about, now is a time where we need more invention than ever. Not to sound too grim, but if we're going to survive on this planet, we're going to have to get really good at inventing new things. And that's going to take everybody's help. The good news is, creativity comes when people are feeling invigorated and feeling excited about something. And joy is one of the, sometimes it's an output, sometimes it's an input to creativity. And I'm starting to wander now, so I'm probably going to stop answering your question.
That's all we do on this show is we wander. We totally wander. I had a little thought there when Marshall and I were talking about this podcast and how it actually pulled us both out of a creative hole that we didn't know we were in. We were in a darkness because, we're both pretty optimistic people, pretty positive people, I think.
And Paul made me realize that I was certainly using my creativity when it came to my kids' school projects and trying to help. And so,
and drawing and writing them a poem or note every single day of their school.
Right. So I'll withdraw the idea that I wasn't being creative at all, but I didn't have any big, meaty, collaborative projects were going on.
And what I was going to say is, in addition to the fact that we receive a great amount of joy from this podcast that we make together, this piece of art, this body of work that we're creating, when I sit here every week and we talk to a new person, I feel like Marshall and I are sitting with our past and future guests together. I feel like they're with us on this journey. And even through Zoom, which I never thought could be possible, really. I feel like everyone's here with us. And that's a community that we've accidentally created because we said to each other, hey, we should record our conversations.
Yeah, the timing of reading this book, The Joy Experience, it's almost like it feels so serendipitous. It's like, this is exactly the book I needed to read at this moment, Yeah.
I think it's the book everyone should read at this moment, but
I know nothing about co-writing though with somebody. I know what it's like to hand over your writing to somebody and have them proofread it and rejig things and tweak some things and send it back. And I know all about that.
Ruin it. Isn't that what editors do? Ruin it?
Yeah, ruin it. Yeah. But I know,
sorry, editors. I'm just kidding.
I know nothing about co-writing a book and how two people pull that off.
Well, I knew nothing about writing a book when I started this. I was a pretty good creative person, pretty good writer. But my thing was like, I can write a couple words, couple lines. I can write a great paragraph. That's about it. I in my research in motion years, I named BlackBerry Bold. I named it Bold. And
one word to get the
Bold.
big picture across.
Right. And it wasn't even a noun. And one of our carriers was screaming at us, saying that you can't call it that. We're not going to take the product because it's not a noun. So you can't do that. And well, we decided we'd do it anyway, and that was a good thing. And then I wrote the headline for it. Be bold. So that was the extent of, like, okay, I'm exhausted after writing 2 words. Be bold. You know,
you're a minimalist.
right. You know, so then the idea of writing a book. So first, you know, and then how do you co-write a book? So first of all, how do you get to the point of deciding to write a book? So I want to talk about Scott's vision for some of this stuff, and so HIP does a lot of interesting projects, and you know, part of it is creating the sculpture Meander for down at Gaslight Square in Cambridge, and a lot of people might have been hearing about the STEAM launch program that will be coming to Waterloo, and various other things that HIP gets involved in because they really care about community. The other word we've been talking about, the idea that community. And there's a whole chapter in our book called "Community is the New Faith," and I think it's a really important chapter. Mm-hmm. But so Scott was sort of saying, we need a manifesto, and I said, well, okay. To me, manifestos are kind of corporate poetry, you know. You write about a couple lines and you make it sound really good, and maybe you put it on a coffee mug and you're all set. But none of that was really touching anything, and we went back and forth of what sort of, you know, what are the words and what is the shape of it, and it was a struggle to find something. And at that time I was reading a book by Rahm Emanuel, who was the former mayor of Chicago and a former chief of staff for Bill Clinton, and he was writing a book about, it was called Nation City, and he was writing about why he did the things he did while he was mayor of Chicago. And his belief was that cities are taking on a new role internationally. Cities are going to be where the solutions are. And I completely agree with him on that, by the way. Anyway, so as I read this book, I said to Scott, I said, well, you know, maybe, you know, I think you should write a book. I think it shouldn't be a manifesto, and it shouldn't be a fancy brochure. It should be a book. If you want the community to start to understand what you're trying to do, if you want the stakeholders within the community to sort of say, oh, I understand your motivations now. Now I know how to participate with what you're doing. So we decided, okay, let's write, let's have a book. And Scott said, well, we need a writer. So we need to find ourselves a writer. And I'm going, like, I'm right here. I can hear what you're saying. I'm standing here, you know, how about me? And so we started. I always believed that writing a book was impossible for me, and it turns out I was wrong. But what I did learn is it's very, 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 very hard. That's the one thing I learned. It's extremely challenging. But our relationship is one where, you know, Scott and I, first of all, we had worked through many of these projects, so it wasn't like we were starting from scratch on stuff. So we would have lots of conversations, and I would grab the conversations and organize them. And so it sort of became that sort of role of me organizing the thoughts as we went through this. And then at one point, very generously, Scott said, you know, yes, this is a book about, it was a sort of starting off as a book about what HIP was doing. He says, but a lot of these are your thoughts. So why don't you not just be a ghostwriter, but we will co-write it. I think there's a beauty in our relationship that we can just sort of work through this stuff. You know, did I write more words than Scott? Yeah, probably. But you know, these are Scott's visions, and some of them are mine, and it's just a mashup of stuff, and it becomes kind of like a good team where players know their position. And once they know their positions really, really well, their positions become irrelevant, and you just sort of work through it. And that's what we were able to do with this. You know, and it's interesting because it took about 1.5 years to write. And then it felt like it took longer just to get the dang thing printed, but that was just our impatience. And finally, when it was all done, and Scott had a copy and I had a copy, and you mentioned how beautiful the book is, and it really is a lovely book. The design team did a great job, and it's a hardcover book. And Scott sent me a little text with a picture, and it's sort of picture of the book beside a can of beer in a backyard somewhere. So he says, "This is what I'm doing this afternoon." And I went, shoot, I should try and do something like that too. So I ran off to Langdon Hall and sat in that little bar they have in the back area and had a glass of wine by the fire and just started looking at a book, reading the book. And, like 8, 9, 10 months go by between when you read it to now it's here. And it's not even like it's yours anymore. It's like you're reading this going, I didn't even remember writing that. And it was sort of it was a lovely experience. I have to say that. And, you talked about the book, serendipitous, it's at the right time. And oddly, I felt that too in a way that I didn't feel while I was writing it. Afterwards, time goes by and I'm reading and going, oh, yeah, I'm hearing so many people talking, about this. Mark Carney in his book Values is talking about the very similar sort of things we're talking in the joy experiments, and Zita Cobb from Fogo Island Inn, when she talks, she's, well, we are connected into something here, but I didn't kind of really get that at the time. And this idea of, you talked about your podcast almost being like a community you're creating. And I think if you do a word, how many times does the word community come up in the book? It's probably like a gazillion times. And because that really is the important thing at the end of the day, is community that gives you joy. And the book really talks about what infrastructure do we need to create, whether it's identity building or whether it's a different approach to public spaces, or whether it's, funding youth stuff or whatever else. This is the infrastructure of joy that will create communities that will give people the sense of connectivity, the inspiration to collaborate more and to do more. At a time when most of us no longer go to church, no longer belong to, the glee clubs or the bowling clubs or much else, and at a time when our technology, the digital technology of our day, and social media is designed to divide us. It's embedded right into how it works. It's designed to give you your view of the world over and over and over and over and over. And by doing that, it divides us because it gives everyone this sense that their reality is the only reality out there. So this idea of community is extremely important, because my premise and Scott's premise and the book's premise is the way we're going to stop the divide is by creating a strong sense of community in cities. It's cities where we're going to solve that problem. It's not going to be national governments. It's not going to be the folks in Davos, Switzerland. The divide in society is going to get solved at the city level, because everything else is too big, too divided even amongst itself, and too rigid and too old to tackle that issue. What if joy was a practical objective for city building? Does anybody here doesn't want to sign up for joy? I think most of us do. Okay, if we can agree to that, and if we can start to have the same language, we have the same words, then we can start a productive discussion about building the type of city we want for the future.
Bonn Park is made possible with the support of the Kitchener Public Library and the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation.
Our show is produced by Sarah Geidlinger
And Marshall Ward.
with audio engineering by Sarah Geidlinger.
Bonn Park's original music is by Alan Lung.